What is up, your bitch boy Millsy? Back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest out brew the magic world. As always, the deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. So I also really appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, use the links in the description. I would appreciate all of it. We're finally here. We made it to Bloomborough, and I'm so excited to finally start talking about this set. This week we're doing all the precons in the order that you guys voted in the community tab of how excited you were to see them. We've got the brew here for all these coming out, as well as $50 upgrades. If you're interested in that, the link will be in the description as well. But the one that you guys were the most excited for, which doesn't surprise me at all, is Hazel of the Rootbloom, a 4-mana Golgari Squirrel Druid commander that you could pay, tap it and pay 2 life to tap X untapped tokens you control, and if you do that, you get X mana in any combination of colors. And at the beginning of your end step, we can create a token that's a copy of a token we control. If that token's a squirrel, we get 2 tokens that are a copy of it instead. I think Hazel's a really interesting commander because I think it does everything that we've seen Squirrels wanting to do. My only slight worry with Hazel before we saw it was, how are we going to make a new commander in a space that's so dominated by Chatterfang? And at the end of the day, you won't beat Chatterfang. Chatterfang is what it is. It's a value commander, it's a combo commander. And I'm glad that Hazel is still trying to do a similar thing, but it's not trying to just combo with a ham sandwich like Chatterfang is. I think Hazel's still going to play the same aristocrats deck style, but I think we want to focus a teeny bit more on Squirrels, a teeny bit more on the food and the new forage mechanic, and just try our best to be a little bit more tribal with our focus instead of Chatterfang, which is playing pure aristocrats, pure just push it to the edge. So we're going to talk about ways we can make tokens. I think the cool part here is we're not just trying to make tokens to be aristocrats. I think we also want to go wide and attack as well, and there's a few squirrels that help us out with that. We're talking about our sacrifice outlets, ways we're just going to sacrifice our tokens to make value, whether it be mana, draw cards, deal damage to our opponents, what have you, and we're going to pair those sack outlets with aristocrats payoffs. So ways to profit from our tokens dying, whether in combat or we sacrifice them ourselves, life to our opponents, milling cards, things like that. I think there's a lot of fun aristocrats payoffs, and we're very good in these 2 colors of taking advantage of them and really hurting our opponents for doing what we want to do. And then at the end, we're going to talk about a few squirrels that really just make all these squirrel tokens we have lying around even better. I think this deck does a very good job at using the squirrels to its advantage, and the upgrades we've put in this brew I think are going to help us a ton. So let's crack into it. As far as tokens goes, there's a lot of way to make them, and I think even though this is our brew and it's based on the precon, with a bigger budget, I still think the precon does a great job at giving us some great outlets for it. Garrick, Cursed Huntsman, is a planeswalker that on its 0 makes 2/2/2 black and green wolf tokens with whenever it dies you put a loyalty counter on it. This is great because it makes those 2 wolves every turn. If we sacrifice them to die, Garrick is effectively getting +2 every turn. And then the emblem on the bottom side helps us down in the future, which giving all of our creatures +3/+3 and trample. So Garrick kind of serves 2 purposes, right? Tokens and then the buff at the end. Beldr's Witherbloom is probably one of my favorite black-green aristocrats commanders, just for its ability at the beginning of each upkeep. You create a 1/1 pest with whenever this creature dies, you gain a life. And then you can just pay 10 life to untap all lands you control once per turn. I like Bellator specifically because of that effect. Every turn you're getting a pest, meaning that every turn you're getting another token. Now, if you pair this with the doublers and things like that, that becomes more. But what I've always liked about pests specifically is when a creature dies, you gain a life. Meaning when you pair it with some of your most popular aristocrat specs, you're dealing 1 damage to your opponent and gaining 2, each opponent gaining 2 for that pest dying. And that does stack up over time as we use them. Deep Forest Hermit comes in with 3 time counters on it, loses 1 each turn. When it comes in, you get 4 squirrels, and it buffs the squirrels. The squirrels themselves are well and worth it. Yes, you only have Deep Hermit for 3 more turns after you play it, but I think coming in with 4 tokens makes it well worth the cost of that going away, and we can use those 3 turns and that buff to maybe get some damage in with the squirrels in the process. Peregrine Took is an interesting card. Whenever you make 1 or more tokens, you make additional food instead. And this is great because we're making a ton of tokens, right? Hazel's going to make us a token on every one of our end steps. So that's nice because we're going to be constantly making tokens. It means we're going to be making foods as long as Peregrine's out. And then we get sack 3 foods to draw a card, help us get through our deck and use it that way. Sandstorm Salvager is a really fun card from the big score. This is one that I looked at because, again, just like Garrick, it kind of plays both roles, right? When it comes in, it makes a 3/3 golem, so that's great because remember Hazel can start copying that token if we wanted to. But for 2 mana and tap it, we can put a +1/+1 counter on each token we control, and they'll get trampled until a turn. This is a way just every turn to buff the team and make them bigger, and run the risk of them hitting in for damage when we pair these with other effects. Chatterstorm, just 2 mana to make a 1/1 squirrel, but we can storm it out after a big spell of a big turn of multiple spells and get a bunch of squirrels to go wide on the board. Pest Infestation is a card I've always liked. You destroy up to X target artifacts or enchantments and create twice as many 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens. What I think I love the most about Pest Infestation is no matter what amount you put into X, you don't even have to destroy target enchantments. You can just get twice X a number of pests. And this is great. If you were to take this deck and go up in the budget and start putting in some of the sack outlets that make mana that I didn't include just to try to keep this budget halfway decent, you could have a turn where you could sack every token you have for the aristocrats abilities and have 15, 16 mana and just dump it all into this and get all of those pests, get all of those tokens right back. But I do like Pest Infestation because you can hit those pesky artifacts or enchantments you don't want your opponents to have, and then get the tokens to kind of make up for it and use for different abilities. Second Harvest, just for each token you control, create a copy of it. Second Harvest is a great card. Happy to see it get a reprint in the precon, especially with that pretty art. And well needed in the deck. The later in the game you wait to play it, the better it is, because of course the more tokens you're going to copy. Chitter Spitter. Beginning your upkeep, you may sack a token. If you do, put an acorn counter on it, and squirrels you control get +1/+1 for each counter on it. So great. This is a way to kind of make your board bigger and bigger over time. Tap one and a green to just make a squirrel. But what I like about Chitter Spitter is it works really well. With Hazel should always be making us more squirrels every turn as long as we can get them out. And Chitter Spitter means we're always going to have squirrels out for Hazel to copy, and then always have one to sack. And so Chitter Spitter is just one of those artifacts that if it sits on our board over multiple turns, it's just going to get tough for our opponents to deal with because we're just going to keep getting value from it. As far as our sacrifice outlets goes, so we're talking about how we're going to make the tokens. And then as we get in towards what we call aristocrats, how we get into this playstyle is we're going to have sacrifice outlets, ways to sacrifice our creatures for profit, and then we're going to have the aristocrats payoffs, which is how do we damage our opponents, how do we get negative effects for our opponents out of getting positive things for us. So obviously Chatterfang came in the deck, and it'd be very hard to build this deck without Chatterfang, as we mentioned before. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, those many tokens plus that many 1/1 squirrels are created instead. You could pay a black and sacrifice X squirrels to give a creature +X -X until end of turn. So a way to deal with pesky creatures. This gets around indestructible, this gets around some things. But mainly you're just getting a squirrel, and anytime you make a food, you're getting a squirrel as well. And anytime you make a squirrel, you're getting a squirrel as well. And so Chatterfang is just a house of value, and we happily want to see it. Warren Soul Trader just got printed in Modern Horizons 3, and this seems like a really great sack outlet for us because it's also making treasure tokens, and there are aristocrat payoffs that care about sacrificing artifacts as well. It says pay a life, sack a creature, make a treasure. So we can turn those tokens into treasure, which we can turn into mana, right? And that just, it's going to help push all of maybe the creatures we don't necessarily need into mana that we can use to cast spells or use abilities or what have you. Soul Trader feels very good for that. And when we talk about the aristocrat abilities that can take those artifacts and damage our opponents when artifacts leave the battlefield, you'll start to understand why the foods and the treasures in this deck are equally as important. But speaking of the foods, let's talk about Ygritte. Ygritte, Eater of All, 5 mana elemental cat, 6/6, has ward, sack a food. All other creatures are foods in addition to their other types. So all of them become artifacts that you can pay a 2, tap, and sack to gain 3 life. Whenever a food is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, you put 2 counters on Ygritte. So Ygritte basically turns all of our creatures into foods, meaning that we can take advantage of multiple of our aristocrat abilities at the same time. Let's say we have an ability that only cares about artifacts leaving, but we also have an ability that cares about creatures leaving. Well, this is going to now trigger both because they're both an artifact and a creature. And I think that's where Ygritte gets really good, is because it allows you to play more of these abilities and make sure that you can get all of them at the same time instead of just getting some of them. Plumb the Forbidden, as additional cost to sack it. You can sack as many creatures as you want. And for everyone beyond the first, you get to copy it, draw a card, and lose a life. This is just a way to turn those creatures into card draw. We don't mind losing the life because so many of our aristocrat effects gain us life back that it's not going to be that big of a deal. Astronaut Altar, just sack a creature for double colorless. Again, this is how we turn our creatures into mana to play a big spell or do something we need to do. We're not playing the Phyrexian Altar just due to the cost tag. Phyrexian Altar is just sack a creature, get a mana of any color. But if you wanted to take this and go a little bit up on the price chain, you'd be playing something like that. And then Skull Clam, equipped creature gets +1/-1. Whenever the equipped creature dies, you draw 2 cards. This, of course, is a great combination when we have 1/1 tokens, because you're going to equip it, it's going to immediately die to state-based actions, and you're going to draw 2 cards. Skull Clamp is a pretty classic way to token deck to just draw cards, and draw as many as you need to in a turn to start sifting through your deck and finding the things you really want. Well, we talked about our sacrifice payoffs, right? Let's talk about our aristocrat payoffs. So you have things like Marionette Master. This is where I think Yigro pairs really well. So Marionette Master says whenever an artifact you control is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So Marionette Master can either come in as a 1/1 or a 4/4, depending on what we choose to fabricate. But whether we choose to sack those foods or those treasures, or Yigra turns all of our tokens into foods and we sack those foods to other abilities, now we're chunking off 4 life at a total of time from our opponents. Mazarek is a really fun aristocrats one. Whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, you put a counter at each creature you control. This itself could just make our board big enough to win the game via combat, to win our game via just having big tokens. And that's always an option we want laying around, because we don't just want to have to rely on this aristocrats engine to win the game. Anything we can do to potentially diversify is what makes decks good and what makes decks consistent. Mirkwood Bats, whenever we create or sack a token, each opponent loses a life. I mean, pure and simple, this is what we want. Whether we're creating or sacrificing, people are losing a life. Nadir's Nightblade, whenever a token we control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses a life when we gain a life. You're going to start to see this over and over again, this ability, but we want as many of these as we can on the battlefield to really take advantage of them. Pitiless Plunder, whenever another creature dies, create a treasure. This is where you'll start to see things like Chatterfang really pop off. Is whenever a creature's dying, you're making a token to replace it, and then you have all of your abilities that say, oh, when you make a token, do this, and you start to see how the value really stacks up on other things. Zilport Cutthroat, whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. Again, everybody loses one, we gain one, and we just chip that over time as we kind of mix in any combat damage we can do or any combat damage our opponents do, and you start to see how your game plan starts to get its wheels turning. Agent of the Iron Throne is probably one of my favorite aristocrats payoffs for a deck like this, because it says whenever an artifact or creature you control is put to the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses a life. So this counts for foods, treasures, creature tokens. Yes, Hazel does have to be out for Agent of the Iron Throne for it to work, but I think it's a completely fair payoff for probably one of the best aristocrat outlets we have, and it's going to not take very long for us to start whittling our opponents down that way. Probably one of the most popular ones as far as enchantments go these days is Bash and Remembrance. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses one, and you gain one. Again, that ability, again, it does come with its own token, but the point here is get multiples of these abilities out and let them shine. Where I think we can start hitting a little bit harder, and where I wish Aristocrats decks would play a little bit more of these so they can finish the game out, is Grave Pact. Abilities like Grave Pact. Whenever a creature we control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. This is just going to make it so as we're sacrificing our creatures, our opponents are going to be forced to sacrifice theirs. And at the end of the day, it's just going to speed up the game. If our opponents don't have any creatures and we have a bunch left, it's going to lead us to getting the game done in combat so that we're not just spinning our wheels the entire game. We can eventually get there for it. But, so we talked about the aristocrats, we talked about the tokens, we talked about the sack outlets. Let's talk about squirrels, because there are a few really good swirls that have come from the new set. Now notice all 3 of these cards are either from the new set or from the deck. But I think all of them are really interesting. We have Camellia the Seed Miser. Menace, other squirrels you control have menace. Whenever you sacrifice one or more foods, we get a squirrel, and we can pay 2 and forage, which is either to exile 3 cards from our graveyard or pitch or sack a food to put a counter on each other squirrel you control. Camellia, we're going to do a deck for them in the future, so we'll see some more stuff around Camellia, but I like this because with Yigra, we should always be just making squirrels whenever we sacrifice a token. Valley Rock Caller seems like a ton of fun. It has menace, and it says whenever it attacks, each opponent loses X and we gain X, where X is the number of other squirrels, bats, lizards, or rats we control. So again, the more squirrels we have, we could potentially be hurting our opponents for 12, 14, 15 damage in combat. And when you pair that with all this other aristocrat stuff, it's not going to take very long for us to make a board state where we're really just eating through our opponent's life. And then Swarmyard Massacre would create 2 squirrel tokens. Then each creature that isn't an insect, rat, spider, or squirrel gets -1/-1 until end of turn, where that's for each one we control. This is a great one-sided board wipe. Yes, we might lose any of those pests we have in the process, but I don't think we mind because we probably already have the death effects set up anyway. But Swarmyard Massacre is just going to allow us to turn our board of squirrels into a nice one-sided board wipe, where then we can profit from that and move forward. So I hope you kind of see the connection there. Tokens, sack outlets, aristocrats. But I've said it before on the show and I'll say it again, no deck is ever perfect. This is my version 1.0 shot at it, and I think there's some things we can learn, including what we might need to make the deck just punch a little bit harder. And that's these 3 cards. The only reason these 3 cards, I'll be honest, were omitted from the deck is the price tag. 2 of these are over $30 to my knowledge. One of them is underneath $20. But I've always tried to do my best to keep a budget on the show to not be $900 decks. I try to keep them around $300 to $400 because I know that not everybody wants to spend that much on a deck. But I think these pieces are important, and I think this is where we should talk about them. Awake in the Woods, X and double green to just make X 1/1 Forest Dryad land creature tokens. You get tokens, you get more mana. It's a great card. I think it's well worth the cost, especially if you're looking to make tokens that can ramp you for future turns or use them for sacrifice fodder. Phyrexian Altar, which we talked about when we talked about Ashnod's Altar, just sack a creature, add a mana of any color. This is such a good ability, especially when it comes to sacking our creatures to keep our turn going. I think it's such a good effect. But again, when it comes to the $40 price tag, it can be very hard for some people to want to spend $40 on one artifact for the deck. Same thing with Meat Hook. This is, I believe, a $30 enchantment last time I checked. When it enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, so we can kind of control how much we're dealing out there. Whenever a creature you control dies, each one loses a life. Whenever a creature an opponent controls lives, we gain life. So again, here's another one of these everybody loses a life when our creature dies effects, but we have the opportunity to just nuke the board while we do it. I think that's what makes Meat Hook such a good card. But again, that individual card price tag can be kind of a lot for some people. So I always try to keep some of these cards, honest about it so that we're all aware on the same page about it. But hey, like we like to do in this show, let's get into our playtests. Let's have some fun. We're keeping the 2-lander with a Nature's Lore, Heroic Intervention, Plumb the Forbidden for some sack outlet, Skull Clamp for some sack outlet, and then, hey, Nadier's Nightblade for a aristocrat payoff. So here's a good hand, right? We have pretty much everything we could want. We're just going to build up towards it. We draw these Sandstorm Salvagers. Okay, here's a way to get a token. I think we're getting off on the right page. We'll get that Skull Clamp down turn 1. Turn 2, we'll get that Command Tower down. Again, love the new art for Command Tower. They did such a good job on that one. We do have a Ravenous Squirrel, but I think I want to get that Nature's Lore out of the way. Go ahead and get a land, a forest of our choice. I think I'm just going to go try to find a dual land. So that way we have more access to black and green. So now, if we have a land, if we draw a land, we'll have 4 mana. Otherwise, I think we have multiple 3 mana plays. We draw Saw in Half, which is a very interesting sacrifice outlet card, but I kind of like the idea of just getting Sandstorm Salvager down here. Come in and get that Golem token. And then now this way, if we draw land next turn and get Hazel down, we can start making copies of that Golem token. So here we go. Turn 4, we'll get Hazel down. We can take the attack with the Salvager this turn if we want to. I doubt on turn 4 we'll have a good place for a 1/1 to get in. But on our end step, we're just going to make another Golem. So now we're good. Unfortunately, the Golems can't get Skull Clamped, which I think is the only downside to the Golems. But again, them being 3/3 bodies makes them pretty darn good with that Salvager once we start buffing them up, right? Turn 5, would have loved to see a land there, but that's okay. Now, we have to start making decisions on what we want to do next. It would make sense to get an aristocrat payoff down. It might make sense to get a sacrifice outlet down if we had one. I like Ravenous Squirrel. It's interesting. Start putting counters on it. I love the idea of Springheart and Tuco. This is a card from Modern Horizons 3. We can bestow it on a creature whenever a land comes in. We can pay 1 into green. If we do, we get a copy of it. This feels like a great card to put on Sandstorm Salvager, so that when a land comes in the future, we can get another copy of it and get another 3/3 Golem. Now, we're not out of mana, right? We have 2 mana left, but remember, Hazel's ability says we can pay 2 life and tap these tokens to add that much mana. So we really have 4 mana. The question is, do we just want to use it? I kind of rather would just use 1 mana for the Ravenous Squirrel. Get it down, have another body down. This is clampable if we wanted to. I mean, I don't think I'm there yet, but I think next turn if we don't draw land, I might clamp the squirrel. I'm going to leave these 2 up because we can do that first ability instant speed, meaning if we needed to play that heroic intervention, we could do it. So I'd rather leave it up. Salvager is obviously not doing anything. This also does give us the option to tap and tap the 2 to do its ability, to give a +1/+1 counter to all of our tokens if we want to. Again, I don't really see that being the best line either, but it is a possibility in this situation. Turn 6, we do get a land, which is great. On the land coming in, I'm going to have Nantuko make a copy of that Salvager, which is going to make us another Golem. And this is great now because we would have multiple versions of that Salvager trick if we want to. That was just 2 mana. We got 3 mana left. Saw in Half is a really fun card. So it says destroy target creature. If that creature dies this way, its controller creates 2 tokens that are copies of that creature, except their power is half that creature's power, and their toughness is half that creature's toughness, rounded up each time. I love the idea of just using the Saw in Half on a Sandhorn Salvager and just getting 2 more of them and getting 2 more Golems. Because I think, at least at the moment, what I'm looking at is we have a chance to win with these Golems, get in with damage, do that kind of thing if we want to. So I think that's what I would do. Do the Salvager, but basically what it's going to do is just end up making, right, 2 copies of it, with half of 1 rounded up being just 1, right? So they're going to come in, come back in, but that's going to make us 2 more Golems, right? So now we're in great shape. We got a Golem army starting up. Let's see. I used my 3 mana for the Saw in Half, so I do have 5 mana's worth to do this. I think there's 2 routes we can go. We can tap Hazel, clamp the squirrel, and use 2 of the Salvagers to buff the board. Or we could just hold Hazel up and do multiple of these Salvagers on somebody else's turn to buff the board. Here's my thought process. If I do it on my turn, I'm pretty much telling my opponents that I'm going to set up for a big swing next turn. If I wait to see if the board's going to get killed first, then I might have a chance to heroic intervention instead. And so I think that's what I'm thinking. I would wait till my opponent's turns. Again, the Salvager's not attacking anywhere. The Golems, obviously, if they have an attack, I'll do it. But I really don't want to because I kind of rather keep them up for Hazel's ability. Remember, these are tokens too, so I can tap them for Hazel's ability as well. Basically, what I would do is wait on my opponent's turns. If anyone tries to board wipe, tap all of them, tap the heroic intervention to give instructable, spread the tokens at the same time since I have to tap. I can only tap all of them at once. But if no one does, I would just tap the 5 tokens, tap 2 of the Salvagers to spread tokens across the board. And so let's say we did that. We tap for the 2 tokens. We didn't have to play that. Now this turn, I would probably just go ahead and clamp the squirrel to get 2 cards because I kind of want to see where, right? Sorry, I think at our end step, we would have made another Golem off of Hazel. But and now we have something like Pitiless Plunderer, so I would probably just get that down. Now this protects her entire board, so if someone tries to get rid of anything, we're getting treasures for it. And then I would probably do is use 4 mana, 2 more counters on the tokens, and they get trample. Now they were 5/5s last turn, now they're 7/7s. And I mean, we probably got at least one person out of the game, threatening to put another person out of the game. And to me, now we're the threat, and we can just leave that heroic intervention up to protect our board. But let's get into another playtest here. Keeping a 3/4 lander with Chatterfang, Abrupt Decay for some removal, and Farseek. I like it. We got a good mix of things. We'll get that Path of Ancestry down turn 1, since I don't really see us doing anything else here on turn 1. Turn 2, we'll get the Swamp down, and I think I would just Farseek. We got a good amount of lands in hand, and why not get up 1 more? We'll go get a Woodland Chasm, put that in tapped. We got just enough for Chatterfang next turn. We got enough for probably Hazel next turn. Really what we'd ideally like to see here is some sort of token creation to help us out. We don't. We see Woodland Chasm, but that's A-okay. I would get Chatterfang down. We'll use the Path of Ancestry so I can scry for a Beastmaster Ascension. I love Beastmaster Ascension. It's a great card. It doesn't make me tokens, though, which makes me kind of how long do I want to wait for a token creator here? We need something, but also Beastmaster Ascension is a card that could lead towards us winning. So I think I'd keep it on top. Here we'll get this down. If I have a good Forest Walk target, I think I just play this Beastmaster Ascension and get a counter on it and get Chatterfang in somewhere. If I don't, then maybe I'd put Hazel down, but I think let's do that. Get a counter on it by attacking with Chatterfang. Work our way up towards that 7 so we can get the +5/+5. Leave some mana up here for the Abrupt Decay in case we need to use it on somebody's Soul Ring or we want to just use to take something off the board. Well, we see Marionette Master. Again, I just wish we saw some sort of token generator here, which kind of stinks. But I will play the Marionette Master. We might as well get the 3 counters on it. So now whenever an artifact leaves the battlefield, have somebody lose 4 life. Again, attack with Chatterfang. Get another counter on Beastmaster Ascension. I think here we can just hopefully rely on Beastmaster Ascension getting up there and being a great buff for us. But we'll go to turn 6. Man, Pest Infestation might almost have been near perfect here because we have 7 mana, which means I can put 3 into Pest Infestation, right? At this point, if people have artifacts and enchantments, I kill them. Otherwise, I'm making 6 pests, right? And I'm making 6 squirrels. Okay. That's beautiful, because now I can just attack with Chatterfang and Marionette Master. I imagine each of them either gets an attack or just gets blocked. Beastmaster Ascension goes up to 4. And I can sack now for Chatterfang in the future if I want to, but I think we're setting up for a brutal turn where opponents have to deal with a bunch of 6/6s, right? So this is another example of where sometimes, you know, as much as you want the aristocrat payoffs, we can just do the tokens things. Play a Soul Ring for turn, and I'd probably just straight swing the board. I mean, putting 4 or 5 of these at 2 people, maybe even 6 each at 2 people to try to knock 2 people out or get darn close, you know, put Chatterfang and, you know, Marionette Master in the mix and just take a big attack here. Because I think even on turn 7, there's probably a couple people that have creatures on board, but I doubt they're going to be able to block 6/6s effectively. And, you know, even if they don't, or even if they do, we're going to knock them down to a low life total. I'd probably just play Hazel this turn with the rest of with 2 mana and the Soul Ring. You know, make 2 more squirrels because of its ability, and just hold. I can do Chatterfang's ability in instant speed. Now I've got plenty of black mana to do it. I've got the Abrupt Decay and the Putrefy up. I mean, the only thing that I'm be worried about here is a board wipe, and it is what it is. If on turn 8 somebody has a board wipe, in my opinion, congratulations, they had a board wipe. But I think what we could do is use Chatterfang to get rid of a pesky creature by... I just realized we would have gotten 4 squirrels. Do that. I think you can kind of see where Chatterfang works so well as a value engine. But I'd love to know, what do you think of Hazel down in the comments section below? This is an interesting deck. I mean, at the end of the day, I will always compare Squirrels or Aristocrats decks to Chatterfang, because in my opinion, in the Golgari space, Chatterfang is at the top. I like that there's a little bit more squirrel support here. There's a little more squirrel love here, so you can kind of play more of that go wide squirrels if you want to, but I still think at the end of the day, Hazel is going to get compared to Chatterfang, and there's going to be those people who will just take this precon, put Chatterfang as the commander, and go from there. But I'd love to know what you think down in the comment section below, and I will catch you guys next time.